Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am A. Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today, my guest is Michelle Tetschner. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First thing is, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are?
Sure. I am a fellow Minnesotan, as we're talking. I have three boys, two older boys, and then Raymond, who is currently 21, almost 22. He has Down syndrome and rocks an extra chromosome.
That's awesome. My next question is, everybody, when you apply to be on the podcast, ask what is your definition of inclusions. So I will read what you submitted. To me, inclusion is a journey. It is an action verb. It takes a team to be successful. I'm a passionate inclusionista. I believe wholeheartedly that inclusion in school leads to changing a community. When children in schools are exposed to persons with disabilities at a young age, they become more comfortable with the differences that we are all created with. They then grow up to be more comfortable when working next to, hiring, being neighbors with, and welcoming people with exceptional abilities into their community. Inclusion is a game changer. Inclusion can change the world. That's an amazing definition. Has that always
Thank
kind of been your, or how? My next question is, how did you come across inclusion? Did you know about it before you had Raymond, or how did you find out about inclusion?
For us, it was easy at the beginning, and we kind of shifted into it. We had a great preschool teacher. She was fantastic. And we started kindergarten, and all was well. And then when we were going to first grade, we were asked to be in a different school in a different co-teaching model, and we were like, okay, yeah, let's give this a try. And it was a mess. And so all of a sudden I knew nothing and had to come up with a lot of knowing everything. So thankfully we had a good community. We reached out, we had an advocate, we had some an older mom that I really had always watched her son and what he was doing, so she helped out. And we went back to our neighborhood school, and we got back on the track of inclusion, because it was a mess. And when a school educator stands up at a meeting and says, "How dare you question my authority? I know everything about your son that is needed." And my response back to him was, "Have you even met my child?" And he said, "No, but I have read your file, which is like this thick." And I said, I'm leaving. And so I said, "You have no right to discuss my child when you have not met him in person." And so I had to learn fast. So
So what? Were you in Minnesota, or did he go to where did he go to school when he was like all the time in Florida, or any of
in
the other
Phoenix,
states?
yeah, actually in Phoenix, Arizona. We were there for 25 years. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
started out there. Okay. Yeah, so for me, I didn't. So I have two children. My son just turned, let's see, 23 in July. My daughter, Cecilia, we call her Cece, will be 22 in October. My son, there was no, all these words that I say, I don't like them, but his birth was normal. Everything was with him was what I expected as a parent. And then my daughter Cece was born 3 months later, found out she had epilepsy, which led to cerebral palsy. She uses a wheelchair. But for me, I didn't know anything about disability. Looking back, I don't recall the word ever being talked about growing up. Don't remember people in wheelchairs. So when she was born, I had learned a lot of it by myself, and since I didn't know anything, I just trusted what the school is telling me. This is where she needs to go, and she qualifies under severely multiply impaired, so multiple categories. So I remember we're in the meetings and just this is where she needs to go, and it ended up being the program across town. My son walked two blocks to his school. She had go on the bus, special ed bus across town to a segregated classroom. Um, I don't remember the exact moment I found out about inclusion, but I do remember at least once going there for lunch and seeing kids kindergarten, first, second grade folding towels, and I was like, this doesn't. Why are they already folding towels? Like, why aren't they going to math class or reading class? So just having to learn, and then a lot of like, like you're saying, finding other people, learning about inclusion. We ended up getting Jennifer Summerness involved. I'm not sure if you know Jennifer Summerness, but she's an inclusion advocate. Came in to help, with the inclusion piece. But once Cece was out of the mainstream general ed classes, trying to get her back in, all of a sudden there's all these hoops that weren't there before to be in there, but now since she was, in that setting, trying to get back in was kind of a struggle. So definitely understand some of the things I'm sure you went through. So just yeah, it's can be kind of intimidating, kind of crazy, but I've also been in IEP meetings where they weren't doing what how they were following the rules they were supposed to, and gotten up and left meetings myself. So I mean, there's just a lot of things, but wow, that was a lot.
Yeah.
Similar stuff though. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, let's see what's my next.
I mean,
Has
for
so
me,
go ahead.
for us, it was always, I think that having watched older parents, we knew where we wanted to go, and that
Okay.
was being included. When your child is already included in your own family, when your child is already included in a church group, when your child is already included in the neighborhood, then
Sure.
why in the world can't they be included in school? Like, that's an
Right.
obvious yes, it can. And how do we get there?
Right.
So that was always our route. And I always looked to, um, the employees that had disabilities that worked at the grocery stores or that worked at the bakeries, or I read articles about the people who had jobs for 35 years at McDonald's. Even though they were doing fries, they were obviously a valued member of that
Right.
store, of that community. And that's where our focus always needs to be, is straight
Right.
ahead. So
For sure. Did you? I mean, before Raymond was born, did you have any past experience with disabilities or any of that type of stuff?
yeah, I actually had a step uncle who had Down syndrome. And
Okay.
when we had Raymond, I actually started having the conversations with my grandma to know some of the arguments that she went through. And it was like, and 30 years later, we're still having the same arguments.
Right. Yep.
It was crazy. And the heartbreaking thing to me is when I went to my 25th um, uh, school reunion,
Yeah.
I had no idea that there were kids in wheelchairs that graduated with us. They did not attend our graduation ceremony. They did
Okay.
not eat lunch with us. And here they were at our reunion, and all of us were caught off guard. And to me, that is horrifying that they were there with us in our school, and yet never recognized, never acknowledged. We never spoke to them or anything. And that is not what I want. We should all be valued for what we do bring to the table rather than what we don't. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. That's amazing that you had somebody in the family with Down syndrome. You said you had asked your grandma about stuff that was happening, and it was still happening 30 years later. Could you give me one or two examples of something that she went through, and then it was still happening with you?
sure. She wanted, my uncle PJ was so fun, and he loved music. And so whenever we went to visit, that's what he was doing, was always listening to music. Um,
Sure.
the A really sad story is that PJ hardly spoke to people at all, unless he knew you, remembered you. He would not be verbal, and she remembers talking with a teacher in kindergarten or first grade, and the lady kept saying yes or no, and he started shutting down and wouldn't talk. And so it was that school setting, that school situation, that kind of robbed him of his vocabulary, of his
Mm.
wanting to speak and feeling comfortable in saying what he had to say. So fast forward to Raymond's being in school. Raymond, having Down syndrome, he didn't talk until he was in until he was 4, which is very delayed. But then he started singing songs and all of the stuff that goes with it, and wouldn't be quiet. And so then we went into kindergarten, where he was, there was only one child with Down syndrome, and it was him in his typical class. And he was
Mm.
not confident, and he was scared. And the teacher said, I don't know if I can do this. He can't even talk. And I said, oh, but he can when he likes you, when he gets to know you, when you show him that he's valued and he feels like he belongs. And so it took them several weeks until he would actually talk. So that's, again, that's something that he held deep to him, is our kids with disabilities do have feelings. They do have things to say. And if we don't give them that sense of belonging, which often comes from inclusion, then they won't speak. So,
Right. For sure. Yeah. I think if I'm correct, IDEA, the law that allows children with disabilities to attend school, is going to be 50 years old next year. And
yeah,
I've said similar things like, I mean, we've come a long way, yes, but there's just like things like that, or, still having, I mean, my daughter is 21, so I mean, I'm not sure if they're still folding towels that age in our school district, but I mean, stuff that should not be happening way after that law is passed, are still happening, and that's,
yeah,
it's crazy to me, like what we've gone through with my daughter during the time been in school. Stuff happens, and you're like, how's that, like, how's that even possible?
yeah,
But yeah, it's crazy. Um, so yeah, one of the stories that I have from when my daughter was been in school is they built a new fifth, sixth grade school. And I can't remember if she was going to go into fifth grade or sixth, but before they were building it, I was at a parent teacher meeting where the principal was going around putting the blueprint up on the screen and showing what the layout of the school was. And I'm sitting there and I look up and I was like, that says special education entrance. I'm like, what? So yeah, they built a brand new school when my daughter was in school with a specific entrance for special education students. And I have had to argue with the principal to allow her to go in the regular, or that's weird to even say that, go in the door everybody else goes into.
right, yeah,
And I actually checked, went back, and I do have emails that validate my story. But it's just, I was like, how is this even possible? We're in the 2000s. She, like you're saying, like she goes out to Walmart. There's not a separate door. I mean, there's not a
yes,
separate door
yes,
anywhere else in the world. Why do we have one in school?
absolutely.
It's just so. I mean, that's one of the stories where I never imagined I would come across that. But that stuff happens, and I mean, is it okay? Not in my mind, but it must be okay enough where it's not really challenged or it's still happening. So, how do you think? How do you think we can move the needle on that, or change, or get the change to happen?
Um, a lot of times it's know better, do better. A lot of
Right.
times, the teachers aren't trying to be mean. They're not trying
Right.
to, argue with you. They just simply don't know.
Right. For
I
sure.
just, somebody posted in in the 100% page, and was like, they called themselves the expert, which kind of demeaned me as a mom. And I was like, absolutely, they are not the expert. You as the parent have the knowledge, you have the
Yep.
expertise, you have been around, you have been to Best Buddies, you have been to Special Olympics, you have the expertise in the building about what disabilities look like. They do not, unless they're
Right.
living it and breathing it, then you are the expert in the room. And I think that you have to teach along. It's easy to get mad, it's easy to take offense. But
Yep.
when you can take the time and say, look, I don't think you've thought about this from my perspective. I don't think you've thought about this from my child's perspective, and lead them to what the journey looks like. Again, looking ahead, they don't know. They don't know that there's over 250 college programs that our kids can now go to. They don't know that everyone
Right.
that our kids that employment is our focus. So you have to
Yep.
teach along the way as well.
That's a great point because yeah, I mean, as a myself, just it's hard. I mean, you're sitting in an IEP meeting. I mean, her evaluation reports 100 could be 100 pages. Her IEP's 50 to 75 pages. So I mean, I've had two, 3, 4 hour IEP meetings before, and a lot. I mean, a lot of that is not positive stuff. So you get emotional, and
Yeah.
you took offense to things that that maybe I shouldn't have. But do you have any tips for parents on how to um, you know maintain focus on what your child wants and what you want for your child and in those kind of situations?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is you lead that meeting. You're walking in with a vision statement. You're walking in with a all about me. And I know that the 3 year, the ARD, whatever you want to call it, state by state.
Yep.
Here's what I say: we can skip most of this. We
Right.
already, as a team, already know where our student is, where my child is. We don't need to go over all of this. We really
Right.
don't.
For
Let's
sure.
focus on where they're at, what they're good at, and that's how we're going to shape our IEP goals. So that meeting for me has always been 20 minutes, and then the next meeting is the IEP meeting, and that's where we're going to concentrate and focus on, because that's where we grow. We don't need to know that my son's not up to standards. We already know
Right.
that. We don't
Right.
need to know what he can't do based on this score and that test that's not set up for him. So
Right.
ignore it. This is where we're going to go. And I say that this is a positive atmosphere. We're a team. What you need, I will get for you if we can't get this. I try to be that resource to the resource. And that changes the whole perspective of where we're going and what we want. So
That's awesome. How did you learn those skills? That stuff you picked up on your own, or was other picking up from other people, or just kind of trial and error? How'd you get to that point?
just a lot of we went to NDSC, the National Down Syndrome Conference, every year.
Okay.
I've gone to NDSS to do lobbying in Washington D.C. Stories are what are going to connect with people, and so
Right.
when you're at that IEP meeting, you kind of need to be a little bit vulnerable, and say, "This is what I need. This is what I want. This is our dream." And I need you to be behind me, and I need you to be with me. And that changes the conversation. Because again, teachers are scared. They're not trying to be mean. What they typically will say is, this is not how we've done this in the past. That's okay. Starting today, we're going to start with this process. It's 2024. Let's move forward trying some new stuff.
Right. Yeah, and it's all about relationships too. I mean, you have to build those relationships with the team, and in order for that to work out well. So I've given two TEDx talks. One of them, the first one was 10 years ago about inclusion, just sharing stories from our life about inclusion stuff in our hometown here. I think in that one of the things that I share is there's been more than once, probably 5 to 10 times at least, where we're just out in the community with CC, just going to the fair, going to Walmart, just being out, and people have said, "Oh, it's so nice that you include her, bringing her with you to the fair." And I was like, "Why is? I mean, I don't like. Yeah, I bring her because she's my daughter, and I bring my son with me. Like, why is it this
Right.
big deal? Have you ever come across that where people seem surprised that you have Raymond out and about doing things with you?
Yeah, for sure. And I find, again, you can take offense to that,
Right.
absolutely. But I think that they're trying to connect with you,
For
like you
sure.
said,
Yep.
they want to know your story. They want to know whatever. And that kind of goes back to the all about me, and letting the other kids in the classroom know what the diagnosis is,
Sure.
what the connectabilities are, what their passions are. Um, I specifically remember doing a presentation in like fourth grade, and we had Raymond in the room at the beginning, and then we took him out for questions. Because if
Okay.
you don't tell the whole story, and if you're not able to ask those questions, we as human beings fill in our own blanks, and half the time they're not right. So I wanted those kids to be able to ask the questions. And of course, one of the kids brought up the R word and said, "Do you think that that's a bad word?" And I said, good for you to ask that question. And here's why it's not a nice word, because it puts everybody who's has an IEP or needs help into one bucket. And that's
Right.
not true. And so we don't use that word. And instead we ask questions or whatever. It was a great conversation, but if I hadn't allowed that little guy to ask that question, he would have made up his own.
That's
Um,
true.
and
That's
we
good point.
followed that up with a note that we sent home to the parents so that the parents could see that and say, oh, you have a boy named Raymond in your class? Tell me about what you heard today, so that they can start the conversation. So I think that's the
That's great.
second part as well. So
That's a great tip. Yeah. Awesome. Um, this is my second TEDx talk that I've done this year. Well, I'm kind of moving. I wanted to go down the path of using empathy to make the world more inclusive. Just we need to talk. We need to reach out, talk to each other. Somebody we don't doesn't look like us. For my daughter, she's in a wheelchair, so kids are really good. They'll just come up and start. Little kids start climbing on her wheelchair. Just this, what is
yeah,
this? Being curious and stuff like you said. But as adults, I mean, so I myself, if somebody looks different than me, my go-to is not to go up and say how are you and get to know them. It's first you kind of stand back and that part of it. So how do you? So I have to on purpose, go up to people, say hi, reach out to them, talk to them. How do you think we can use empathy to be more inclusive in the world?
well, I think that all of us are likely to be disabled at some point in our lives, whether that's a
Sure.
broken arm, whether or not that's having a baby stroller and you can't get through the
Right.
doorway,
Yep.
whether that's being elderly and having dementia. So if we start now to, recognize that and think to ourselves, I want to be friendly now because I want somebody to be friendly to me, then it's a
Right.
different thought process. And it goes across all disabilities and all differences. We all have talents and gifts within us, and
Yep.
acknowledging that is huge. And Raymond is not an academic guy. He's not the best reader. He's definitely not good at math. But you know what? He wants to joke and dance and laugh, and everybody wins with Raymond.
Right.
There's
Yep.
you might run a race and you might be there first. He's still going to come up and be like, "Yes, we did it. We completed it." So there's not winning can be defined in different terms as well. So we've just got to acknowledge how beautiful each of us is, and that changes the conversation.
Absolutely. So Raymond, he's in college now. Is that correct?
Not currently. We
Okay.
we gave college the old college try.
Okay.
Um, it was a great learning time for us. He lived on
Sure.
campus for a few months. It didn't work out so great. He was able to make some choices that weren't the most healthy and the best,
Right.
but he learned how to use his credit card. He learned negotiating skills. He learned a lot of skills from other
Sure.
people. Um, but he now has two jobs,
Okay.
and he is living independently with a roommate. And there's always going to be bumps and hurdles in our lives, whether it's our
Right.
typical children, our children with special needs, or us as adults. And so
Right.
it
For sure.
depends how big we make this little bump, or do we make it a mountain that we can't get over,
Sure.
So yeah. So it's life is always exciting and always a journey. So
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I mean I've had similar thoughts. So my son, I want both of them to be happy, and I mean whatever that means to them. I mean I'm okay with that, whether they go to college, work, whatever it is. But just for me, my son makes a decision, and I'm not as concerned, I guess, for me, and I guess I'm being super vulnerable just because I'm not sure the reason, but for her, I feel like it's more she makes a decision just because the way the world's set up, maybe society, where she has less chances or less ways to kind of get out of it. So it's been kind of that way. I kind of maybe more protective of her than my son. So that you kind of just talked about that a little bit, where we're all humans. We all need to be able to make choices, and sometimes those choices don't always end well. I mean, I've made choices that don't end
right,
good. You
right,
just hope, like you're saying, you don't make one that has lifelong, life altering consequences. So That's a very interesting point. Like the freedom of choice or the freedom to choose. That's a big thing. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Raymond turned 21 last year. So our
Yep.
kids are about the same age. Um, and leading up to his birthday, it was his big deal that I'm going to have a beer on my birthday. So we would
Yep.
say, we started in like August and we're like, and it's your birthday. And he'd say, my birthday's in October. And I would
Yep.
say, what are you going to do? And he'd said, have a beer. And this mom who has a child with Down syndrome as well looked at me and she was horrified. And she said, you're not going to let him drink, are you? And I said, of course I am. Do you know
Right.
another 21-year-old who doesn't
Right.
want this, who has
Right.
looked forward to this? And she's like, oh my gosh. Like her daughter was 26. That had
Yep.
never struck her that our
Yeah.
kids deserve the same thing as everyone else.
Right.
Granted, I don't. He drinks once a month now.
Right.
It's not an issue,
Yeah.
but he deserves that. He deserves that opportunity and that dignity of risk to
Yep.
experience everything like everybody else. So.
Yeah. That's great. Do you have? Let's see. What is one tip that you can share with our listeners today to be how they can be more inclusive? It's just something simple. They don't have to go spend a bunch of money, go to a class or anything. Just one thing simple they could do today.
I think for educators as well as ourselves as parents, we have to presume competence. That's a big
Mhm.
saying for me. Um, and as a parent, don't be the door, be the window to open up other possibilities. I know I'm guilty of it all the time, and I've written several articles that have been published by the Mighty um, to like Raymond was opening a package the other day and I was watching him struggle and I was like, oh, I'll just go get the scissors. And as I'm walking over to help him, I thought, this isn't fair that I would just step in. He hasn't asked
Right.
me. And I
Right.
know that I can do it so much easier and simpler, but that's not the point. He
Right.
deserves the opportunity to try. And
Right.
so a lot of times we as parents are like, just move over, I'll just do it. And
Yep.
that's not okay. We need to step back, give that opportunity, and let them live their lives. For example, with Raymond moving out, it was very worrisome at the beginning, but I also had to say, what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Right.
The worst thing that's going to happen is a storm's going to come and the electricity is going to go out. Well, that's happened to all of us before.
Right.
Guess
For sure.
what? Nothing else happened.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to run through the scenarios in your head and give a little, be brave.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. For sure. That's a great tip. Or I don't know if people are gonna be able to see it, but you've written this book, or written this book with other people. Share fully included stories to inspire inclusion. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What got you started on that project, and a little more about it?
Yeah. So when Raymond was in fourth grade, our principal, who had backed us so well at our school, she came to us and said, I'm leaving in the spring. So you need to figure out, we need to put some players together if you're going to stay here, what you're going to do. Let's set this up. Again,
Sure.
whatever you
Yep.
can do in advance is better.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at Catholic school instead. And so by doing that, we went to 4 different schools and they all said no. And so the 5th school finally said, well, we'll do a quick interview, but not for a couple weeks, even though school started in 2 weeks. And so we
Yep.
went in and had the conversation with her about being transparent and setting our expectations and being on the same page. And she was like, yes, we want him to come. And so once I realized that there were these little pockets of inclusion, it wasn't just in our city that was struggling,
Right.
California was struggling, but then there were places where like people from Iowa were getting inclusion and we never heard from them in our
Yep.
Facebook groups. There were like New
Yep.
Jersey has a very inclusive school district. No one
Yep.
from New Jersey comments on stuff. And so I wanted to pick some of these success stories and put them all into a book and say, see, this is being done. It's not just you. You're being a pioneer, but let's go forward and give this a try. So
That's awesome. Yeah. That what you just said makes a lot of sense because yeah, I've listened to Think Inclusive podcast, Tim Viegas. I mean, and I think he had stuff where out in Washington State that it seems like they have a lot of
Yes,
really positive stuff going on. So yeah, why can't? How do we get to replicate that to Minnesota? I mean, Minnesota is pretty progressive with education, but it's. I mean, in my mind, inclusion is not to the level of what some of the stuff is happening in Washington State. So how do you get that? Here and like
yeah,
you said, it's happening all over there. How do we connect to those people to figure out what they're doing and spread the word? So that's really awesome. How
yeah.
many authors are in there? I didn't count them. Like it's quite a few though.
That's
It's
yeah, it's quite a few. And some
it's
of the
quite a few.
stories are longer, some of them are
Yeah,
shorter.
that's great.
Um, yeah,
So yeah, I told you before we came on, a couple of people I know are in there: Tina Green and Leslie Sweeney. Um,
okay.
Both took partners in policymaking in Minnesota after I did, so I know them. So that was the reason I bought the book quite a while ago. I don't remember, so that's why I have it. But that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Is there
It was
anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed?
Partners in Policy is a great way to get involved,
Yes.
in your state, wherever you are. Having lived 25 years in Arizona, I grew acclimated to the abbreviations and all the acronyms.
Yep.
When we shifted over to Florida, I had no idea, and I needed to be up to speed really quickly. So I did Partners in Policy here in
Okay.
Florida,
Awesome.
and it's life changing to
It
know
is.
what the systems are and to know about them. So I definitely
Yeah.
recommend
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. Okay. The last question: do you like spam? Yes or no?
that. I'm from Minnesota. I grew up on Salem. Haven't had it since I was like 18. Is it one of your
Gotcha.
favorites?
It is not one of my favorites. I mean, I'll eat it. We had it, the disability caravan that's going around the U.S. I got them to stop in Austin, go to the Spam Museum. So
Oh,
we had the driver over and we cooked up some because he was in town. But I mean, I haven't had it for quite a while. I used to eat it. I mean, I've never eaten it a lot, but I mean, I will eat it. So
yeah.
yeah.
I'll take
So
walleye. I'll take some
it's
Minnesota walleye
there you
instead.
go. That's better. Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. I'm from Austin, Minnesota, where the Spam Museum's at, so I thought it'd be something cool to
Gotcha.
ask everybody. So right now we're about half and half. I'm keeping a spam count, I call it a rolling count in each of the episode descriptions where we're at. So yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, where's the best place for everyone to connect with you?
Feel free to find me on Facebook.
Okay.
Feel free to join the 100% inclusion page. Let me pull up the whole title. 100% inclusion for individuals with special education needs. Um, Fully included stories to inspire is a page on Facebook as well. One
Awesome.
of the things in writing the book was we inserted a lot of different pictures and graphics too. So I'm big on words. Words are super powerful. So
Yes, for sure. That's great. Well, thank you for being on the show today. I had a lot of
thanks.
fun.
Thanks. It was fun to get to know you. Thanks.
Yeah. To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.